So yeah, session time's just started, acknowledging that people will be coming from different sessions. There might be a bit of a delay, but just for those that are already on the call, I would just want to introduce Jacob and Lucy from Business Disability Forum. Really looking forward to their presentation on what disabled consumers decide to buy and why. Under the branch of technology. Just very quickly on housekeeping, please use the session tab to find Slido Q&A on the right and use that for questions and comments. Session chat and Q&A is actually switched off due to accessibility. And then there is a BSL interpreter on screen. So pin Carol Spencer if you require that. And captions are available at a link shared in Slido. But yeah, I'm Mark from AbilityNet, just helping in terms of a bit of moderation. I'm very excited to hand over to Lucy and Jacob and have your presentation for everyone that's joining us.
Thank you very much, Mark, and thanks everyone for joining. It's great to see you all today. As Mark said, I'm Jacob Spargo-Mabbs. I'm technical writer and editor at BDF, and I'm joined by my colleague Lucy. I'll let you introduce yourself, Lucy.
Thanks for that, Jacob. So I'm Lucy Ruck. I'm the Taskforce Manager at BDF, but predominantly I look after the technology task force, so I have that tech angle as part of my role. Just checking we can click onto the next slide, Jacob, and should we check the tech works for us? It's always fun. There we go. So that's our little intro, isn't it? I was also just going to reiterate what Mark said at the beginning. If you do have any questions as we go through things, there is a Slido link on the right-hand side of your screen. So please do post any questions that you have for us in there, and we'll be happy to get to those either during the presentation or maybe we've got a bit of time at the end of it. Thank you.
Thanks. Excuse me. So yes, that's who the two of us are. I'll also introduce where we come from, which is Business Disability Forum. We are Business Disability Forum, the leading business membership organisation in disability inclusion. We are trusted partners working with business, government and disabled people to improve the life experiences of disabled employees and consumers by removing barriers to inclusion. So today Lucy and I are going to talk to you about our consumer research, which we undertook earlier this year and published a few months ago about what disabled consumers decide to buy and why. We published one research report that came out in 8 parts, and we also published 7 sector-specific reports. And those covered banking and insurance, days out and leisure, holiday accommodation, hospitality, retail, technology, and utilities. This being TechShare Pro, we're focusing on the technology side of things. So a large part of what we're going to talk about today comes from our technology sector report, but technology was a theme in pretty much all of the areas that we covered in our research. So there'll be findings that apply to all sorts of sectors in there. Especially utilities and banking and insurance, which had large technology aspects to them. You can access these on our Knowledge Hub, which is a part of our website. I'll just read that URL now. It's Business Disability. Oh, sorry, Lucy.
I was going to say, I've also put it in the Slido chat, so people should be able to access the link from there, because it's not the snappiest of links, is it really?
Not. No, thank you for saving me from reading that lengthy URL.
Actually, I did do a quick check earlier on. If you just type in disabled consumers choose to buy, it will, if you type that into a search engine, it will come up with that on the BDF website. But do follow the link and it will take you directly there as well. But type in roughly those words and you should find it as well.
Fantastic, thank you. And I do encourage you to have a look at it if you're interested, because there's so much more in there that we wouldn't be able to cover in a half-hour session today. I'll just go on to the next slide. So this research involved a number of different stages. So we did 10 depth interviews with member and partner organizations. We also undertook a quantitative survey with 1,001 respondents, 457 of whom identified as disabled. We did then a qualitative survey, which had 241 respondents, and we also did 4 focus groups. So one of the most interesting questions we asked the consumers that we spoke to as part of this research was what factors influenced their decision to buy a product or service. And so I'll go through the top 5 of those now. So the one that was mentioned the most often was the general features and specification. And that was mentioned by 74% of our respondents. The next most popular one, not necessarily a disability specific one, that was cost. And that was mentioned by 70% of people. And then ease of setting up the equipment or software comes in third at 59%. 45% of respondents were looking for positive recommendations and reviews, and specific accessibility features were mentioned by 43% of respondents. And I've just put a little bar chart on the right-hand side of the screen there, which has what I just said. So I'll cover the features and spec now so what did we find that disabled consumers were looking for specifically when they say they're looking for the features and spec of a product or service? So disabled consumers, we found, were looking for products and services with specific features or specifications. So not necessarily accessibility features, but they wanted to know that it would have the features or spec that matched their needs as a disabled consumer. So this was often more general stuff. So respondents mentioned things like the weight of it or the size of the button. And there was one respondent who mentioned the texture of it because they wanted to make sure they'd be able to hold it when their hands weren't as strong on some days. And we've got a few quotations here. I'll hand over to Lucy.
Yeah, my job is to read the quotes out to you and give Jacob a mini break and give it a change of voice as well, which I think is always useful with these things. So some of the quotes we had back from people during the research was, how big are the remote control buttons for the new TV? Is there large and clear print on the remote control? You know, these things we sort of take for granted, but it's simple questions. Another quote we had, it was more difficult to get specific information. For example, is the card reader available in an accessible version? Is the mobile app accessible? And we're going to come back to some of that stuff a little bit later on, especially around banking and how people do stuff. And then one around handheld tech. I need to be able to hold it when my hands aren't working. So the cover or case has to be right. It has to have a secure grip and not too bulky to hold. Now, all these things you might not necessarily be able to see from an image or a picture, but a little bit more in the description might be helpful, and actually wouldn't take an awful lot of work just to add those few little extra bits of detail in.
Absolutely.
And the other one here, we've got there's an abundance of catchy gimmicks and services constantly advertised, and the simple facts overshadowed by jargon and marketing creativity, which confusing when needing basic information. I think we talked about this a bit the other day about a new swanky mobile phone comes out and it shows you all the whizzy, wonderful things it does. But I just want to know, what's the accessibility features, or how heavy is it? I mean, you can drill down and find that stuff, but some of the basic stuff sometimes is missing because marketeers have got involved and made it a bit too fancy and missed all the really useful stuff that we're really going to use in it.
Absolutely, yes. Yeah, thank you, Lucy. So yes, as we've covered already, having the right features and spec is crucial for many disabled consumers. And in our research, we found that 62% of our respondents said that their disability or access needs influenced their choice when they were buying products and services. And 36% said that their choice was limited by the disability or access needs. So there's a large number of consumers out there who find themselves unable to buy certain products or services because the features and spec don't match what they need. As well as kind of general features and spec, there's also a large number of respondents looking specifically at the accessibility features. So features designed specifically with disabled people in mind, or people with access needs in mind. And that was 43% of the respondents we spoke to said that their accessibility features available influenced their decision when purchasing.
And again, relating to those accessibility features, we've got another couple of quotes for you. So, since I mainly access my banking and insurance products online, good accessibility of apps and websites are key decision-making considerations. I think that came through quite a lot. And the models did not show which had built-in accessibility, and it would have taken an age to trail through them. Even the customer service people didn't seem bothered to, struggling reading today. Even the customer service people didn't seem bothered to it, so I didn't purchase. And I think that's the other thing. If people can't find what they're looking for, they're going to walk away. And if people aren't being helpful, it's just no incentive to buy the products from those people. They'll go somewhere else. We know this.
Yes, absolutely. And we'll get on to customer service in a few minutes because that one came out strongly. But I just wanted to talk briefly about cost. As I said earlier, that was the second most influential factor when our respondents said what influenced their decisions to buy. 70% of respondents said cost was something that influenced their decision to buy. And in the current climate, we imagine this is only likely to become more influential. But it's also relevant to disability in another angle, which is that being disabled often comes with extra costs. So costs of the cost is likely to be felt more acutely by lots of disabled consumers out there. So that's something to consider as well.
And again, we've got some more quotes around that cost element. I had to make sure that the TV had audio description on it, but there was very little choice and prices are always more due to being disabled. And then another one, it seems the expensive utility providers might be more accessible. It's no good going for a cheap deal if you can't access the information or read the meters. You know, it's about that limited choice is massive, I think, around this as well, isn't it? So,
absolutely. Yeah. That was something that came out a lot, was that a lot of respondents felt they weren't able to go a lot of the time with the cheapest option because it wouldn't have the features that they needed, or it wouldn't have the customer service to back it up. And so a lot of consumers felt safer going with a more expensive option, even if it was they were paying more than they needed to.
And it's probably a bit of a lottery. If people don't tell you it's available, you'll assume it's not. So you will lose customers potentially, won't you? So let people know what they can do and be very upfront with that information, isn't it?
Definitely, especially with the second quotation talking about utilities. It's such an important thing to get right. You don't want to be tied into a contract for energy for a year, only to find out that you can't actually read your meter or submit your meter readings online because the website's inaccessible. So that was one of the findings around cost as well. We made some recommendations after creating these research reports, and they come into two main strands really. The first of those is you've got to make information available and accessible. So that means having clear, extensive, detailed information about the products and services that are on sale, and making sure that manuals and specifications are available in accessible and inclusive formats. So it's not just about publishing it, but it's about making sure that all disabled people are able to read it and understand it. The second strand came down to customer service, which we mentioned earlier. So you've got to make sure that customer service and sales staff are aware of the products that are on sale and have a basic knowledge of what features and specifications they have. And if they're not aware of that, they don't have to be an expert on everything, but they have to know where to go to find that information. So is there an internal expert they can talk to? Is there a document that would have this information somewhere? And better support for customer service staff on how to set up items or services and troubleshoot when things go wrong. So I'll go into a little bit more about finding the right information now. So yeah, as I said earlier, the information about features and specification needs to be detailed and comprehensive. Only disabled people will know what they need to know. So it's just worth putting as much information as you can out there, because I know before I did this research, it wouldn't have occurred to me potentially that a disabled consumer would need to know about the texture of a mobile phone case. But having that information out there would have been so helpful for that individual, and I'm sure many others. And it must also be easy to find and understand, because being unable to find it, consumers will just go somewhere else where they think they might be able to find it more easily. And it must be easy to understand. It's no good having poorly translated or incredibly jargon heavy or lengthy manuals or how-to guides. It's not going to be accessible to many disabled people. It's not going to be understandable. And it's not going to be easy for any customer, let alone disabled customers. And that goes on to my final point here, which is that information must be presented in accessible formats with alternative formats readily available. I believe you were going to say something there, Lucy.
I was just going to say about the size of fonts and stuff that's used on a lot of things. Yes, digital space, obviously, but thinking more in terms of that physical space of technical products even. The font size on stuff, I'm finding the contrast is very poor on things. I've now reached that middle age where I'm needing to get my reading glasses out to read the small print on stuff, whether that's the packaging on cooking a pie of an evening or whatever it is. And actually, it's kind of a little bit more of that personal insight into the challenges of when stuff isn't done accessibly. And I did see a really good advert the other day for the use of Be My Eyes with a number of products. And that was, I'm talking about I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here Again, as we touched on before we started this session. But it came up in the advert break then. To see something like that go mainstream, where people are talking about stuff, was really good to see. So yeah, I think where you can use the tech to enable that interaction with stuff is incredibly helpful.
Definitely, yeah. Tech can be such an enabler in this space. Definitely something to embrace and engage with. And I'll just go on to a bit more about the customer service and support as well. We found that it was so valued by our respondents when they were able to get through to someone, either in person or online, who they could just ask their questions to. So our first recommendation is that customers need to be able to speak to someone to ask questions. The person they speak to needs to be able to answer their question or redirect them to someone who can. So as I said earlier, it's not about making people on the shop floor top level experts, but it's about having processes where you can direct people to the information they need or to people who have the information that they need. And finally, clearly signpost where support is available on setting up things and troubleshooting, because often it is in fact the case that these things are available, but people aren't aware of how to access it, and therefore it may as well not be available to those consumers who can't find it. Here's a story from one of our respondents, Lucy.
Yeah, and I really liked this story, and it just felt so real, actually. So one respondent with sight loss shared a story about trying to buy some new hair straighteners. I love hair products, so this really resonated with me. And she needed to know whether the product would make a bleep or a beep when heated up. Does it make a noise? How do I know when they're up to temperature? So what they did is they actually called the department store and explained to staff on the shop floor what the issue was. They switched on in the store and they let her know by the end of the day. They phoned her back, and actually she went back to that store and bought the product from them because they'd been so helpful. She could have probably bought it a little bit cheaper online, but really valued that interaction. And actually it wouldn't have been difficult to say, when it gets to temperature, this will make a beep or let you know. It will make an audio notification to you. That would have been really easy to include on the specification. But when we were talking through this, another situation came up that I was sharing with Jacob, a story going back quite a few years ago. It was really quite unique and a little bit interesting. And I think this just goes to show sometimes when the straighteners get up to the right temperature, they make a beep. You could have added that to the specification or the detail on the website. That would have been quite easy to do. But then there are all those.
Oh, I think we've lost Lucy. I'm sorry, I can carry on that story because Lucy has told me that one before. And it goes to a story of, let me get this, I want to make sure I get this right. It was a story from, I believe it was Lucy's husband, and he was working with a student who needed a new laptop. And this student had a disability that meant that when noises of a certain frequency occurred around them, they would pass out. And so this student needed to know whether a laptop, when they turn it on, would it cause them to pass out, which is, of course, something you're not going to be able to find in a manual. So what they did was they went into the shop and they asked the store assistants if they could just turn on a few laptops and see which ones would work for this person. And they tried one or two, and that caused the person to pass out. Sorry, Lucy, I stepped in there briefly as you vanished.
I know, I don't know what happened. It's the joy of technology. It just got kicked out. So yeah, you're absolutely right. So they pass out. I think it was something to do with the noise that it would make, or the frequency of the button of switching a laptop on. So they brought in a few of them for them to try, and they tried a couple, and inevitably that it was a student. They passed out when a couple of the laptops were switched on, and you could see them bracing themselves in the anxiety of knowing that when this equipment was switched on, they may well pass out, and inevitably they did. And I think they tried something like the third one, and they were bracing themselves ready to pass out, and they didn't. And I think that literally meant that they could turn up to lectures, they could carry on, they could switch on a laptop without passing out and carry on with their day. And literally, it changed their world because they were able to do what we take for granted, which is just switching on your kit and get going for the day. So things like that, you could never include that in your specification about a product. I think it's always worth saying that. But what you can do is you can go above and beyond to try and help someone that's going to make a massive difference to them, but actually takes maybe half an hour of your day. So there's that kind of softer side, I think, to this side of things. So thank you for covering that, Jacob, while I had some connection issues. You did a fab job. Thank you.
That's okay. It's been such a memorable story. It hasn't left my mind. So yeah, thank you for sharing that earlier. But yeah, I think that highlights the two strands of what we're suggesting here, really, which is that you can share all the information about the products and services that you can, and you'll answer a lot of people's questions. But there's always going to be instances where someone needs to just try something out or ask a specific question that that may not have occurred earlier. So that's the customer service and support. And yes, that goes to really what I was saying just now. So one of the key recommendations we make is to let people try before you buy, wherever possible. The best way for disabled people to know if they could use a product or service is to be allowed to try it out before they purchase. And I feel like the laptop story it really highlights that. We've got a few quotations that came out from our research as well, covering try before you buy.
And these are really interesting. So let me test a mock bank account and physically handle items such as the card reader and the mobile app. This way I was able to judge whether they would meet my access requirements. So you sign up for a new bank account and they tell you about the accessibility features, but I want to try them. I want to see them. I want to see if that's actually going to work for me, because transferring banks is actually quite a lot of hassle. And I want to see that's going to work. So this is what it is. It's that try before you buy. I've got another example here. If I needed a new washing machine, I went to a local independent store and they allowed me to fiddle with the dials and twist and press buttons to see whether it's accessible for me. And they really listened to what I needed. Again, a big store could do that, but they chose to go to a local store because they felt they'd be looked after a little better. And actually, again, it reminds me, I ended up putting some nail polish on my washing machine so I could see where the dials were, because it was all white. And although it had a slightly raised bit, there was no contrast there. And I wanted to be able to see easily where things lined up. So, you know, we end up doing our own adjustments or accommodations on these things, don't we? But yeah, being able to go and look and see and feel, even a digital products, but in the physical space, can be so important to people.
Absolutely. Yeah, it came through so clearly in our respondents on talking about try before you buy. What we didn't include on the slide here was that the washing machine story ends with them buying the machine from that store because they found one that they knew would work for them. When we asked customers about instances about shops that gave it right, that got it right, it always seemed to come down to customer service, pretty much most of the time. So while it wasn't something that influenced their decision to buy, when we asked what influenced their decision to buy, when disabled people talked about shopping or consumer experiences or businesses got it right, they so often talked about great customer service and support. I've got a quotation here at the bottom of the page. Would you like to read that one, Lucy?
Yeah, I'll go for that. So buying a new laptop, I was completely guided by the customer services through the choices available without any pressure to buy. I was treated throughout politely with understanding and compassion. I mean, basically what they're saying is they were treated as a human being who was just asking questions and wanted to know what it did, weren't they?
Yeah, basically. It doesn't sound like a tall order, but it can often be.
Yeah, entirely.
And I'll finish up on my slides here with a few conclusions. And the first of those is that disabled consumers usually know what they need, but they can often find it hard to know whether a product or service will provide this. Secondly, making it simple to find and access the right information is the largest step businesses can take to make buying technology easier for disabled consumers. And finally, providing detailed specifications in clear language and alternative formats with knowledgeable customer service support staff to back this up is a straightforward way to vastly improve disabled tech consumers' experiences. So that takes me to the end of our slides, but I'd be really interested to hear if anyone has any insights, questions, or comments on disabled consumers and technology.
I'm just looking in the chat. I can't see any questions. People saying that a great customer care story. I think I'm hoping that was the one probably about the straighteners, because it's so simple and it could have been included. And that's the massive thing with some of this stuff, isn't it? It's about listening maybe even to your disabled colleagues in terms of what issues they might be having, what information do they just struggle to identify, and then figuring out how you find this stuff. I suppose the other thing I would say is that we've put a link in the chat to where you can access this resource and all this research covering all these different sectors. As we said at the beginning, Jacob, tech is sort of weaved intrinsically throughout all the sectors, although there is one specifically on technology itself as well, isn't it? But do have a look. There's sort of overviews and then more detailed in case studies and all sorts of detail, and it's free. Please go and have a look at it and share with colleagues, because it's really quite powerful, the difference it makes. This isn't rocket science. It's just thinking about it and having it on your consciousness and then making sure you include it, isn't it, Jacob?
Absolutely. It's not rocket science at all. But I would also say that it's sometimes it's surprising how simple the solutions are. And it's things that when sometimes there were solutions I hadn't thought of until I read the research, and then I heard it and I thought, well, why didn't I think of that? That seems mind-bogglingly simple, but it just takes someone else pointing it out, someone who has the lived experience, perhaps. And that's what we tried to bring through in our research. So it isn't just stats and figures, but we've got these depth interviews and we've got the focus groups. So we match those the hard numbers with stories of lived experiences from disabled consumers. So yeah,
it's a theme that's come up during the course of today. I'm hearing about the power of stories. Yes, stats can be one thing, and that works for some people, but that's storytelling, really bringing something to life. That's the stuff we remember. That's the stuff that really matters and has an impact. So I don't think we've got any other questions, unless I've missed anything in the chat.
No, I think you're right, Lucy. Just lots of acknowledgements about, you've mentioned it already, Jacob. You know, great to have the data behind it, but the quotes that you're pulling out, Lucy, it just resonates, doesn't it? And it's so useful to see even a single quote, the power of a single quote. So I'm really interested to see that. If anyone is listening in, I can see that lots of you are. If you do have any questions, please do put them in the Slido chat, as we mentioned. I have a couple of questions for yourselves, Lucy and Jacob, if you're happy for me to ask a couple of questions.
Yeah, of course, please do, Mark.
I mean, it seems so impactful, the report, and I have to fess up that I haven't looked at the report before the call, but I'll definitely be looking at it after now, having had your presentation. I just wondered, you know, as a consumer user, it's so impressive and it's so impactful, the kind of research you've done. What is the reception from the kind of where you're wanting the change, if you understand what I mean, from the technology suppliers? Are they receptive to it? You've got a great opportunity here speaking at TechShare Pro, and I imagine there's lots of other kind of marketing and PR opportunities you're doing. I just wondered, what's the kind of reception that you have when you are able to speak to kind of technology suppliers?
Jake, I'm kind of thinking banks, actually, because banks have a technology interface. I think that try before you buy of how to use your, you know, we've all got those little pin things to do your web banking and stuff like that. And that thought of actually allowing someone access to a dummy bank account, if you like, to try this stuff. I think it's kind of like, oh, I hadn't thought of that. I hadn't thought how that would work. So I think there's an element of, it's a really good idea. I'm not sure where that's at the moment. I haven't had those in-depth conversations, but I think sometimes it's the simple things that actually aren't quite so simple to implement, because setting that stuff up would take a little bit of time, I think. But that kind of, yes, that makes perfect sense. Of course, you'd want to try something like you would if you were shopping for a jumper. You'd want to feel like what the jumper was like. You know, we want to see how those accessibility features actually work for me. So, yeah, Jacob, did you have any more thoughts around that?
No. I think there's a very varied experience of businesses. So in the reports, we decided we're not going to name and shame organizations where our respondents said they'd had a terrible experience, but we do name and praise. And so you go through there, and you'll hear some stories about named organizations that do really well. I think Amazon comes up. Lush was definitely mentioned. I think Primark came out as well.
I was going to say, it was John Lewis with the hair straighteners, wasn't it? I remember that as well. Yeah.
John Lewis definitely with the hair straighteners. Yeah. So there's a huge variety of experiences in this in different sectors, and because technology came out in kind of all of the 7 sectors that we did reports in. It's something really for every organization to consider. There's no organization that doesn't have a technological side to it somewhere.
That's really good to hear, and I know you've name dropped a few ones there, but I think it does paint a picture, because those are household names. It's wonderful to hear that, some of those examples, and I imagine when you have one of those quotes, to be able to enter with that quote into a conversation with a business, it's just so powerful. Backed up by the numbers, as you say, Jacob. But yeah, great. Thank you both very much. I hope everyone listening enjoyed the session. I certainly did. There haven't been any further questions coming through. So yeah, really, I just want to again thank you, Lucy and Jacob, for your presentation. Replay will be available to anyone that's missed this. But otherwise, thank you very much, and I encourage everyone to look at what the next sessions are for TechShare Pro.
Thank you. And thank you to our interpreters as well today for joining us, and everything else. Thanks a lot, guys. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye. Take care.
Bye.
Thanks, Carol. Thanks, Anna.
Bye.